my name's Tim. I'm a graffiti artist and illustrator from Cheltenham. Welcome to my office. As you can see, I'm surrounded by art materials and this is what I do for a living. Today I'm going to show you how to draw this picture here using the kind of felt tips that hopefully most households will have. Pens, pencils and a few other bits and pieces. So keep watching and we're going to go in and look at how to do that now. So here's a close-up of the drawing we're going to work on today. The title of this drawing is Eden, Restoring Paradise, and it basically shows nature growing out of a ruined city and taking back over the world. Hopefully you will learn some new skills using felt tip pens, how to draw a sky, mountains, trees, water, rocks, a city, some bricks and some lettering, and how to put it all together into one composition. So keep watching and I'll show you what materials you're going to need. But before we get started, just to let you know, in reality, it took me about 2 to 3 hours to design and draw this picture. This video, of course, is a lot shorter than that, so if you are going to follow it through and draw it with me, I recommend getting ready to pause, rewind and fast forward the video so that you can keep up with it. So if you're going to draw with me, I'll show you now what materials you're going to need. So you'll definitely need a pencil, an eraser, a pencil sharpener, you might need a ruler, that's up to you, and some regular white A4 paper. For the outlines I use fine liner pens. I've got 2 different thicknesses here, 0.2 and 0.8, but to be honest any fine liner will do. You can use a biro, but they tend to run when felt tips go over them, so I try to use fine liners. The white pen above, I'll tell you about that later. And with regards to the felt tip pens, I've just got a big box of assorted pens. They're all different types and I'll show you how to match them colours up later on in the video. Speaking of which, the first half of the video is going to be how to draw the outlines. The second half is going to be about colouring. So there will be a sheet available to download with the outlines already on if you just want to do the colouring exercise. So to begin with, get your sheet of paper, measure about halfway down. You can use a ruler if you want to be exact about this. I'm doing it by eye, and then draw a line very lightly with the pencil across the middle of the paper. Next we're going to draw another line halfway between the top of the paper and the line you've just drawn, and then do the same for the bottom half of the paper too. So now your paper should have 4 sections, all of which are about the same size. Once you've divided the paper into 4 equal sections, go back to your middle line and put a dot right in the middle of the page. This will be known as your vanishing point. Next we're going to draw the 2 trees either side of the centre of the page. So pressing lightly with the pencil, you want to make them about the same distance from each side, so you've got roughly a square shape in the middle. You can also start to add some of the branches and the roots at this stage. And remember, keep your pencil lines as light as possible because we will need to erase them all later. The next part we're going to do is the bottom quarter of the page. It's going to be a brick wall, so put the ground in first, and then just like we did before, we're going to split it into 4 equal sections. So do a line across the middle and then a line above and below that. And now do exactly the same thing again, this time going down instead of across, and this will turn our section into a grid, which we will later transform into bricks. Next part we're going to draw is the city skyline. So for this part you just need to draw the outline of different types of buildings. Put in a couple of chimneys, a couple of different shaped rooftops. Just go from one side to the other, going up slightly higher on each side. Now we're going to make the buildings look 3D. So to do that we're using the vanishing point we drew earlier. And you can use a ruler for this if you like, it's a lot easier if you do. Make some lines come out of the top of the city skyline that you've just drawn, all going towards that vanishing point. Make sure every line that you draw only goes a short distance. You don't want them to go all the way into the middle. And once you've done enough lines, you can join them up like I'm doing here. And now the buildings are starting to look really 3-dimensional, like they're all vanishing towards that point. This is quite a technical way of drawing, so take your time with it and try and get the buildings to look 3D as possible. The next thing we're going to do is draw the letters that say the word Eden at the top of the page. The way I'm going to go about doing this is to make a box and then put the letters in the box afterwards. Once you've drawn the box, find your center point and draw a line up. Now you've got 2 boxes, then split those 2 boxes in half again, giving you 4 boxes, 1 for each letter. These lines I'm putting in here are to put spaces between the first and the last letter. Now we're going to draw the letters themselves. As you can see, I'm trying to use the shape of the box to make the letters fill each box as much as possible. And by the way, you don't have to use these letters that I'm using. You can choose any font that you like and try and get them to fit within those boxes. When you're happy with how the letters are looking, we're now going to make them look 3D using the same vanishing point technique that we used for the city. Also make sure that you apply the same 3D effect to the inside of the letters as well. When you've done the 3D, now it's time to do a bit more detail on the trees and also put some leaves underneath that line where the letters 3D ends. I'm also putting some leaves in front of the actual letters themselves to make it look like they're coming out of the leaves on the trees. Now going back to the bottom of the page, we're going to turn this grid into a brick wall. Trace around some of the lines you've drawn with a slightly heavier line, putting more pressure on the pencil. To write the word paradise on the wall, first of all we're going to create a box just like we did with the word Eden. The word paradise contains 8 letters. So if we want to make this fit into the box, we need to put half of the letters on one side and half on the other. So here's another way to make sure your word fits within a space. Rather than drawing a box for every letter, what we're going to do is draw the first letter on the left, which is the P, and then next we're going to do the last letter, which is the E. Try and make the E about the same size as the P. Next we're going to put in our 2 middle letters, which is an A and a D. So do the A first. In this case I've actually made the A go slightly higher up because I think it might look a bit more funky. And then to balance things out, I'm going to make the letter D go down so it mirrors the shape of the letter A. We've got the end letters and the middle letters, so now we just need to put the last ones in between. You can do this in any way you like, just try and make them fit equally between the letters you've already got. Here's another trick to help balance the shape of the word out. If you put a little dot at each end, try and space them right, it can just bring it all together. Now we need to write the word restoring above the word paradise. I'm going to use a similar technique here to the way we just wrote paradise. I'll do the end letters first, then the middle one. Because it's a 9-letter word, we actually have a middle letter this time, which is an O. So I put in the R, then the G, then the O first, and then just fill in the gaps afterwards. To help the letters stand out from the wall behind it, we're going to put this big paint splatter around the letters with it dripping down and going onto the floor below. This is also a good time to add some 3D to the bricks using the vanishing point. So we've got the word Eden, we've got the words restoring paradise. Just going to add a few more leaves to the top of Eden here. So now it's time to do the center section, which is where our landscape will be. You can start anywhere you like when you're doing a landscape drawing. I for one like to jump between the foreground and the background. So I've just put in the waterfall rocks on the left,
And now I'm doing a winding river coming in from the background to the foreground, because I want everything to sort of be based around the river. The top of the waterfall, which I just drew then, before it goes down, I'm trying to make it kind of go towards the vanishing point. All of the background still kind of needs to head towards the vanishing point to give the impression that we're looking into the distance. Then I'm putting some trees behind the waterfall, a little hill, a couple of extra buildings just because it feels like that space could be better used. And yeah, it's really just a case of building the landscape up in layers and making sure that everything looks balanced. Let's get some mountains in the distance. Right then, it's time to go back to those trees again, and gonna add a bit more detail, this time focusing on the roots of the trees, just making them sort of like grow over the top of those buildings in the foreground. If you're not sure how to draw these, of course you can copy what I'm doing. Have a look on the internet for pictures of overgrown ruins. Alright, we're going to add some details to the buildings now. Put in a few windows, some roofs with holes in, stuff growing out of them, bit of cracked plaster. If you get stuck for ideas, once again, yeah, check out, go on Google, do an image search for ruined buildings. One other little tip, when you're drawing any kind of picture which is symmetrical, whether it's a face or a landscape or whatever, I quite often go between the left and the right hand side of the page whilst I'm drawing, so I'll do a bit on one side, then I'll go to the other side, try and keep it even and balanced. So going back to the top of the page, where the word Eden is, it felt like there wasn't enough going on up there, it was a bit too empty. So I'm just adding a few extra leaves to sort of fill the space around the word Eden, just make it look a bit more interesting. Okay, we're done with the pencil sketch. I'll just go around quickly with the eraser, get rid of any marks I don't like and maybe a few tweaks here and there, but yeah, congratulations, we've done all the pencil work. Okay, so get your thinner fine liner, and now it's time to start drawing over the pencil. Whenever I start drawing with the pen, there's always a bit of pressure that, because you can't erase it, like with a pencil it's permanent. So I always start on something easy just to warm up and get used to the feel of the pen. So in this case, seemed like a good opportunity to start with the leaves because they're nice and easy to draw. If I do something wrong, it doesn't really matter. And by the time I go on to the next bit, which is going to be the letters, I've already kind of got used to the feel of the pen. So when I'm drawing around the edges of the letters, you can see that I'm making the line a little bit jagged. And that's partly to make the word look like it's made out of stone. But also, if you add those little jagged bits to your line work, as a rule, it makes the drawing you're doing look more organic. And also, it covers up any small mistakes you might make as well. Little pro tip there for you. So I realise I've been talking for about a quarter of an hour non-stop, so I'm going to give you a little break from my voice. I'm just going to leave the video running, so hopefully you can just copy along to what's going on at the moment, and then I'll come back to you in a bit. Actually, before I take a break from talking, there's one little tip I will give you. Whenever you're doing line work, if you're not sure about something, just leave a gap. I leave gaps all the time. You can see on the trees here, I'm leaving little gaps because I might change the shape of the tree later. So by leaving gaps there, you're basically giving yourself an extra chance to make adjustments later on, if that makes sense. Okay, so we've done all of the foreground, and so now we're going to start drawing the actual background countryside scene. So for this, try to use less detail, because as things get further away in real life to your eye, they appear less detailed. Also, don't want it to be too confused with the foreground. You want a bit of separation between the foreground and the background. And the other thing I'll say is, like I was saying before about leaving gaps, when you're trying to use the pen lightly as possible. I know it's the thin pen, but try to not press too hard on it and just leave little gaps here and there. Try and make it kind of almost like a fainter image, if that makes sense, to the foreground. Okay, so that's the background done. Just going to finish off some of the bricks at the front. So now it's time to erase all of the pencils. So get your eraser, and what I tend to do is hold the paper with one hand and push away from you with the eraser in single strokes. Do that for the whole top half of the page, and then when you've got halfway down, turn the page round and then do the same on the other side. What I often find after erasing all the pencil is that the picture actually looks quite empty compared to before. It looks like there's more space there, so this is a good opportunity to get the fine liner and just add some extra detail, especially in the foreground, if you think it needs it. Gonna add some very shallow 3D to the word paradise, going towards the vanishing point, and this will be coloured in black and actually look more like a drop shadow. Okay, so this is the thicker fine liner. It's 0.8mm, and this gives you a much heavier line. And what I'm going to use this for is to go around all of the foreground. So the bricks, the trees, the city, the word Eden, all of it. It's going to have a thicker line, and this is going to make the foreground look really separate from the background. Notice how I'm using the thick line. I'm not going over every single line. I definitely go over the outline. So I go around the outline of the bricks, the outline of the trees, the outline of those buildings. And then I might bring those lines in a little bit, but you don't want to go over every single line. You need some thin lines in there too. When I was drawing these leaves, I first of all put the thick line just on the underneath, but then I decided afterwards, yeah, I'm going to go all the way around them because I want them to stand out a bit more. So at this point, I'm just going to stand back, look at my picture from a distance. It feels like there's still some extra lines that need to go in. So put them in at this stage. One part that's bugging me is this bit here. The archway of the two trees doesn't feel symmetrical enough. So I'm adding some extra leaves to the right hand side just to try and balance that out. So at this stage, I've done most of my thicker outlines. I'm starting to add a little bit of extra shadow here and there. So colouring in any broken windows, any areas that I think are in extreme areas of shadow. I just put a little bit of black ink there and try and build that up all over the picture in the foreground. Again, the background we are not touching at the moment. We're leaving that alone. When I'm working in these final stages of putting the line work down, I tend to look at the picture a lot from a distance just to make sure that everything works together and the overall image is balanced. I keep talking about balance, but it's really important, especially at this late stage. This is your chance to make everything tie together. Amazing, we've finished our picture. We've done all of our line work and now we're ready to start colouring in. So get your felt tip pens and let's move on to the next section. So before we start colouring in, get your felt tip pens ready and a sheet of white paper, and first of all we're going to start sorting through the pens. If you don't have as many pens as what I'm using for this tutorial, don't worry, a pack like the one you see in front of you now will definitely be enough for this video. It costs about £2.50 from Amazon, but the more colours you have, the better for shading. So first of all, I get the pens out and I put them in different colour groups. So to begin with, I'm going to start with my reds, oranges and yellows. Next, I'm going to group together some brown pens for the trees. And then my green pens for the leaves, then blues for the water, and some purples and pinks for the buildings. Now we're going to start sorting the colour groups in order of how dark or light they are. The thing is with felt tip pens is that the colour on the cap and on the case of the pen isn't always accurate, so it's much easier to tell what colours you're working with if you put it down on paper first. Figure out which pens are the darkest and which are the lightest, and put them in the order of darkness, with dark on one side and light on the other. This pen here I thought was orange, but it's actually more of a light brown, so I've put it with the brown colour group. Continue with the rest of the colours, putting them down on the paper until you're sure that you have a nice selection going from dark to light. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the brown pens. And now the green pens. Then the blue pens, and then the purple and pink pens. To stop the pens getting mixed up after I've spent all this time getting them in order, I put them on a tray, or in this case the lid of the tub that I keep the pens in. This stops them rolling around and keeps them in nice order, so they don't get jumbled up. There wasn't enough room for the reds, oranges and yellows, so I'm just going to keep them separate for now. They should be okay. The piece of paper we've been testing the pens on is going to be extremely useful when we're colouring in the rest of the picture, so keep it handy somewhere nearby. Also, you might want to get some other colours involved and test them out on that paper as well. We're going to start colouring the picture, starting with the background first and then moving forwards. So first of all we're going to do the sky, then the mountains, then the river and the waterfall and the hills, then the city, and finally we're going to do all of the stuff around it, the trees, the bricks and the lettering. So let's start with the sky. It's going to look like a sunset going from red through orange to yellow. The technique I use to colour is to go in lines from one side to the other, and then I go to the next colour and I do the same again and overlap the previous colour a little bit, and this helps them blend together. It's the reason I colour in lines like this is if you go in a scribbly kind of circular motion with the pen, with felt tips it has a tendency to make a mess and actually tear up the paper, especially if you're using thin cheap photocopy paper, which is what I'm using here. I nearly always start with the darkest colours first, because this gives me an opportunity to go over the previous colour with a lighter pen, and then they blend together nicely. I just realised I forgot to fill in the gaps between the branches, so I'm just going back in and redoing those bits there. Now it's time to colour in the mountains. I want them to be grey. However, I've just realised I haven't found my grey colour group yet. I had a quick look through my pen box and managed to find 3 different shades of grey, so I'm just testing them out on the paper to see how they look. Okay, they look alright, no problem, we'll go with those. I want these mountains to look like they're lit from one side, so I'm going to make the left hand side dark grey and the right hand side a light grey. I'm going to leave the snowy peaks white to begin with, but I will start adding some little lines just to give the impression that there's shadow falling on the snow. You can make these little lines using the very point of the pen if you use it very lightly on the paper. Carry on adding the shadows with the darkest grey pen you have. When you're happy with the shadows, it's time to get the next grey. This one's a slightly lighter grey than the first one, and add a few more extra shadows with it. And finally get your lightest colour grey and go over all of the mountains, including some of the snow. Do try and leave some light areas on the peaks so that the white of the snow can show through the shadows. When you're happy with how the mountains are looking, it's time to get your green pen and start colouring in all the countryside, starting right in the distance and working our way forwards. Different trees all have slightly different shades of green, so I try to swap between the pens as I'm going. I try to start with the darkest colours first, and then as we come closer to the foreground, I start using lighter greens. You can also see that I'm putting down some dots of the darker green and then going over it with a lighter green afterwards. This helps blend the two colours together and give the effect of leaves. Using the darkest green pen, I add a few extra details such as pine trees. I'm also colouring in the area around the river with the dark green, because the river will be blue and this will help it stand out more. Sometimes when you're using the lighter colours over the darker colours to blend, the tip of the lighter pen will get mucky, so just give it a quick wipe on some tissue and then carry on. I just realised I forgot to colour in these areas of sky between the branches, so I've just gone back to fix that quickly. Now let's get the rest of this countryside finished. So you can start to see now that I use the darker colours in the background, and then as we get closer towards the viewer, we're using lighter and lighter colours. Just adding a few extra details with a slightly darker pen. Right then, we're done with the green pens for now, so let's get the blue pens and start colouring in the water. I'm going to have a quick look at my colour chart. I'm going to go with the second darkest blue to start with, again starting in the background. The technique I'm using here, similar to the sky, lots of very short lines from left to right, leaving gaps in between where the white paper still shows through. And this kind of gives the impression that the water's moving and there's reflections on it. I'm leaving areas deliberately white, especially near the riverbanks and anywhere where the water is connecting with something else. This helps the water look like it's reflecting, but also it helps it stand out from the rest of the background. Now take your next lighter shade of blue and carefully go over all of the darker blue that you've just put down. And now I'm taking my darker shade of blue and I'm going to use this to create some reflections in the water. So wherever there's a riverbank, I'm using a little bit of dark blue just to give it a little bit of reflection. I'm also going to start drawing into the waterfall with the dark shade of blue, starting on the left hand side and moving in very short, delicate strokes to give the impression of water flowing downwards. finish with the dark shade, go back up to the next lighter shade, and same technique again, go back over the dark with the slightly lighter shade of blue, using the same delicate short strokes. And finally, with your lightest shade of blue, go over all of what you've just done again. You can leave some areas of white if you like, but I decided I was just going to colour it all in blue. Finally, at the bottom of the waterfall, you have this cloud of water vapour, so you want to be leaving that mostly white. Just add a few strokes of the light blue pen to make it look like a cloud. Now it's time to get your grey pens again, and we're going to colour in the rocks either side of the waterfall. So just like with the mountains, I've gone in with my dark grey. In fact, this is my medium dark grey first, and I'm putting in all the areas that I think would be in shadow. So let's imagine everything on the left hand side is going to be dark, and everything that's facing up or to the right is going to have lighter grey on it. And now get your light grey pen and colour in all of the remaining white areas on the rocks. Looking at the picture again, the rocks and the mountains are the same shades of grey. Really, the rocks, they're further forwards, and the mountains are further back, so the mountains really in this picture need to be darker. Unfortunately, I don't have any darker shades of grey, but what I do have is my black fine liners. So I'm going to use the 0.2 fine liner and go in and start drawing some extra dark shadows on the mountains. For anybody who's doing just the colouring exercise and you don't have a fine liner handy, you can do this with a biro too if you like. I would definitely recommend having a go on a scrap piece of paper first though, just to get the hang of it before you go in and start doing it on the main picture. You can also start using the black pen to add extra details in other areas than the mountains too. Little shadows on the edges of the trees, and you might want to put in some extra trees as well along the horizon line. I thought the space up the top left needed something, so I've added a few extra pine trees in black, silhouetted against the sky. And just adding a few final details with the black pen. Little extra trees here and there in the very, very background, a few extra shadows. Bit of extra shadow in some of the rocks. Brilliant, so we finished the background now, and now it's time to start colouring in the foreground. So we're going to start with the trees. Again, start with the darkest brown and do all the shadowed areas first. With this tree here, I'm going to break the rule of light coming from one side and make it so the light's coming from the center. So it's going to be almost a mirror image of the other side. So the shadows will be on the right instead of the left. Now get your next lighter shade of brown and start blending it into the darker shade of brown. And finally, I'm going to get my lighter shade of brown and colour in all of the areas left on the trees that are still white. The next part we're going to colour in is the tops of the trees and all of the leaves surrounding the word Eden. Once again, I am starting with the darkest shade of green to do the shadows first. When you're finished with the shadows, get the next lighter shade of green and start putting in the next layer. If you look at the way I'm colouring here, I'm actually adding some extra shapes to give a 3D look to the tree canopy. Now get your next lighter shade of green, colour in most of the remaining area. As with the last step, you can colour in areas with a certain shape to them that give it more of a 3D look. And now finally I'm using the lightest shade of green to fill in all the remaining white areas. Going back to the tree trunks again with an extremely dark shade of brown, which I forgot about, I'm just going to add some extra shadows in just so it matches the darkness of the tree canopy. We're now going to colour in the brick wall, so grab a dark orange or light red and let's get started. As with all the other stages, you start off with one of the darker colours and slowly build in the lighter colours as you go. Once again, whilst you're blending the colours, if you do find that the pen gets darker ink on it and it starts to smudge, just give it a quick clean with some tissue and then carry on. The tops of the bricks I'm going to colour in with yellow just to make them stand out as the light is catching them from above. Now going to colour in all of the buildings and the area around them with the purples and the pinks. This time with the lighting, I'm going to make all of the sides of the building facing towards us really dark. And then the tops and the sides of the building are going to be catching the light. Now when I went to put the pink colour on, I noticed that actually it's not quite light enough for what I'm after. So I had to go and dig around in my pen box to find another shade of pink. This lighter pink looks good, let's go with that. I decided to colour in all of the remaining white areas with this colour of pink. Not sure about that, it looks a bit too flat. Let's try that medium shade of pink again. Okay, that works. I'm going to stick with that. So now I'm colouring all of the sides of the building with the medium pink and leaving all of the tops of the building in the light pink. Now to colour in the Eden lettering. So the process for this is exactly the same as the brick wall, starting with the dark red, moving on through the oranges and finally into the yellows. The only thing that's different is I'm blending in a little bit of light purple afterwards, just to help with the shadows. Back to the greens again to colour in these leaves. I'm not going to use the darkest shades, I'm going in with a medium to light green to begin with, and then I'm leaving the tops of the leaves completely white so they look like they're reflecting light from above. Now I'm going in with a slightly darker green just to make those shadows a little bit more visible. Going back to the bottom of the piece, I'm going to colour in the ground, make it a brown colour just like the trees. First dark and then a light brown. I do apologise, it's slightly out of view of the camera. For the paint splatter surrounding the word paradise, I decided to tie it in with the same light pink that the city uses. But rather than colour it all in a solid colour, I thought it'd look better to just do areas of it with pink. A bit like the waterfall vapor cloud. To give it so it's mostly white with a sort of edge of pink, like a shadow of pink, and put a few extra drips and splatters on there. And a nice colour that goes with a light pink is a light blue. So I decided that would be a good thing to use for the letters. And again, rather than colour them in a solid colour, I thought it would be nice just to give them a bit of shadow in that colour. But leave the lettering mostly white so it stands out. Just adding a little more extra or light blue on the waterfall's vapor cloud, and a little extra green here and there on some of the bits I missed on the grass and the trees. We're almost done. This is something I nearly always do when I'm getting near the end of a picture. I go back in with the black fine liner and just bring out any extra shadows that I want to make a little deeper, add a few extra details. It's sometimes really worthwhile going back and doing this, but I mean, at other times, sometimes you just got to know when to stop. So if you feel like your picture's finished at this point, by all means, stop. Don't go back in with the pen unless you feel like you actually need to do that. And by the way, this is the 0.2 thin fine liner. Okay, so this is the pen I was talking about earlier. This is called a white gel pen. It's basically like Tip-X. You can draw on top of most surfaces with it, and it leaves white ink on the page. And it's really good for highlights. In this particular instance, to be honest, I don't think we really need to use it much, but I'll just show you a couple of examples where it might be useful. It's definitely effective at bringing out extra ripples on the water and also on the waterfall as well, if you see that. Just adding those little highlights, little splashes at the bottom of the waterfall, tiny little spots of light reflecting off the broken glass in those windows, some little highlights on the edges of the tree. You don't want to put too much on, remember, if you put too much on it can make everything look a bit too shiny. And not everything is shiny. It's also really good for bringing out the snow on those mountain peaks too. It's also good for highlighting the edges of the letters where the light's hitting them, just to make them look a little bit more three-dimensional. One last blast with the fine liner, just a few little extra details, little shadows, and then a couple of highlights to be made with the white gel pen. And we're done. We've finished. Congratulations! So if you followed this tutorial through to the end, you will have learned how to do a sky, mountains, trees, river, waterfall, a cityscape, the trees again, Eden, lettering, the leaves surrounding it, a brick wall, and some graffiti style writing. And not only have you drawn it, you've coloured it all using just felt tips and added shading and everything. I really hope that some of the techniques you've learnt in this video will be useful for you in the future when creating your own artwork. Nice one!